GDP and 11% of its exports. Today, there are about 450 IT companies in the country employing more than 10,000 developers and engineers with encouraging prospects for growth. So our objective with our time here today is to share some of the thinking about our current post-war recovery era, focusing on the tech sector in Armenia. I look forward to all of us listening closely and engaging with our speakers. I would like to give voice to you as our audience. So I'll ask a series of questions as the interviewer to address what I would like to think you would like to hear. And what I don't address, I will devote some time for the audience to do so by writing your questions in the chat box. And so let me tell you a little bit about our guest speakers here today. Dr. Yervant Zorian holds an MS in computer engineering from the University of Southern California, a PhD in electrical engineering from McGill University, and an MBA from the Wharton School of Business, University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Zorian is a fellow and the chief technologist of Synopsys Corp and the president of Synopsys Armenia. He has authored more than 350 scientific papers, 4 books, and holds 42 US patents. A fellow of the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, he was selected by the Electronic Engineering Times among the top 13 influencers on the semiconductor industry in the past 50 years. Dr. Zorian was the recipient of the prestigious Industrial Pioneer Award, the IEEE Hans Carlson Award for Diplomacy, and he was the recipient of the National Medal of Science from the Republic of Armenia. Being a former Bruin, this is quite impressive for a Trojan. Raffi Kassarjian has earned a BA in International Relations and an MBA from Stanford University. He and his family moved to Armenia from San Francisco in 2008. Prior to moving to Armenia, Raffi served as a vice president and general manager at Fair Isaac Corporation, where he launched the company's first internet service. Currently, he is the executive director of the Union of Advanced Technology Enterprises and leading business association representing technology companies in Armenia. He is also the CEO and principal advisor at Sensian LLC, a boutique advisory firm focused on the growing Armenian technology sector. Interestingly, Raffi also served as CEO of Icon Communications, Armenia's first broadband service and wireless service provider. Thank you both for your time here today. So I thought we'd start, we'd begin from a historical perspective. So from a historical perspective, one that predates the origins of the Velvet Revolutions, how would you describe the startup environment in Armenia in general and in technology in particular? Yervant, I'll ask you this one.
Yeah, pleasure. First of all, good morning and good evening to all of you. I'm very pleased to be on this program. I've been participating in ARPA sessions on and off, and I'm very glad today to take a role in this session. Technology. Technology in Armenia is not new, as we know. It started back in Soviet era in the 50s, 60s, when the Soviet Union chose Armenia to be one of its key centers for developing capacity, for developing R&D and prototyping. We've never been in volume manufacturing as such, but as you mentioned, Ani, we were very good in developing new solutions, in mainframes, in control systems, and in defense as well. So that activity produced good talents over time. And we had, of course, you know well, the role of Mergelian Institute, the role of National Academy of Sciences, the universities, and so on. Once Armenia became independent, we were at risk. We were at risk of losing some of the capacity, some of the talents that were developed over time. So what happened then is we started, as diaspora, it opened up to us as well. We started collaborating. Initially, it was not, and bringing in startups from Silicon Valley mainly at the initial phase, and later multinational companies by acquiring those small startups to make them larger entities. So during the first 10 and 20 years, there were mostly companies coming from outside to Armenia, helping with the tech industry. When we went early 90s, there were 3 companies only. Over time, they increased. Over time, we have now a very large number of companies, close to 1,000. Many of them startups. And during this past 7, 8 years, we have seen many startups that are born in Armenia. Some examples that you gave, like Gigi, like Crisp, like Pixar. Those are very nice proofs of companies born in Armenia and then coming to the US. So the other side now is working very well as well. So while we have our multinationals, my company Synopsys being one of the multinationals, we have about 900 people working in high-end R&D in Armenia. There are several other multinationals as well. But the other way, the new startups and coming here, becoming larger companies, is working very well. So in a nutshell, that is the situation in Armenia, that 5% GDP comes from this about 1,000 companies, about 20,000 people working in Armenia in this domain.
Interesting. Thank you. Okay, moving forward, so walking down memory lane, upon the unraveling of Armenian-Azeri relations resulting in the War of 2020, what would you like to say about how the information technology responded to the needs of Armenia during the war? How did Armenia fare in defense technologies in particular?
So maybe I can jump in on that one, Ani. Actually, I'd like to rewind the tape a little bit and go back to 2016, because the four-day war we saw in 2016 was actually the first indication that the nature of warfare between Armenia and Azerbaijan, which had been essentially, as we all know, kind of a frozen conflict with sort of skirmishes happening every once in a while on the borders. We saw the beginnings of the use of much more sophisticated technology on the part of Azerbaijan. And so that's the first time that we heard, for example, about Israeli drones. They were also using incendiary explosive devices and other things that were kind of a small indicator of what was to come. And at the time, many Armenian technology companies and people in technology, including the association, the Union of Advanced Technology Enterprise, which I'm responsible for, said, you know what, this is the sort of the future of warfare, and we need to be better prepared for it. So the UAT, along with others, had announced mobilization plans in the technology industry to get companies and scientists to think about sort of how we can invest domestically in some of these technologies that could be used in a potential war with Azerbaijan. So at the time, what started out as sort of almost volunteer efforts to try to bring these technologies together turned into several startups that were focused on various military technologies, including different types of drones and other types of sort of more traditional technologies. And so that process started in 2016. And then, when the war began at the end of September, the good news was that there had been some progress had been made, but there was, the R&D hadn't been done at the pace that we would have liked. And one of the few very positive things that came out of that war is that a lot of these companies were able to sort of battle test a lot of their technologies and understand where they needed to invest to move further. So I think the story really starts in 2016. And now there are a whole bunch of lessons that we've learned from the war that will drive efforts, not just purely military technology, but also in the kind of research that we do and the kind of areas that we want to focus on.
Could you speak a little bit to those efforts? What kind of efforts are being taken to address this, and what specifically, what capability?
So listen, I mean, if we look back at what happened in this 44-day war, there were 3 sort of technology intensive parts of the war that were driven by Azerbaijan. So the first one is military technology and the actual sort of warfare on the ground and in the air. The second one is cyber warfare, second area, and the third area is information war, and really what was happening in terms of trying to own the narrative on various platforms, including traditional media, online media, social networks, and the like. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the first one and the first 2 and talk a lot about the third one, because I think that's where there's a lot of interesting things that could be done. But in sort of from a purely military perspective, the 3 things that Azerbaijan used to great effectiveness during this war was the notion of situation awareness. And by situation awareness, I mean really having a very good understanding of where our sort of the Armenian side of Armenian forces were deployed, what kind of technology was being used. And this was through a combination of satellite imagery, reconnaissance drones, and other technologies that they used to be able to have a much better understanding of where sort of things were on the ground. And they used that to great advantage. They combined that with more precision targeting and precision firing. And again, a lot of people, the focus was on these things like, kamikaze drones or attack drones, but that was only a small part of the arsenal that Azerbaijan, technology-driven arsenal that Azerbaijan was able to use. In fact, a lot of times what they were doing was sort of using reconnaissance drones or satellite imagery to identify where Armenian units were, and then using traditional weapons like artillery or Smerch missiles or whatever that might be to attack with great precision. And so I think as we look forward, we really need on our side to understand that not only being able to defend ourselves against these kind of attacks, but also using the same technologies to be able to neutralize some of those things that were aimed at us are very important. I don't want to get into a lot of detail, but really it's all about, rather than having large number of tanks and a lot of artillery and traditional ground forces, you really need to think about how technology can be used more effectively in battle. And the second area in terms of cyber warfare, they sort of did three things. One was to do broad scale attacks on sort of our most visible websites, including, for example, the website of our organization was also hacked the first few days, but we were able to sort of protect against that very quickly. The second was exploiting vulnerable weaknesses throughout our infrastructure. So a lot of Armenians woke up one day to see that the name of their Wi-Fi network had been changed to Qarabağ as Azerbaijan. And they did that for a very simple reason, because a lot of people never change the standard password that comes on the router that's given by the telecom company. So they just use whatever password's there. They knew that password, they were looking at these networks. People learned very quickly and changed that as well. And then in certain cases, they were able to get access to sensitive information. But again, I think one of the things our side excelled in during the war was having a much stronger sort of defense and response to cyber attacks. The third area, I think, is an area that is not necessarily, in fact, it's not at all military, but we understood how important this was owning the narrative online, and not only in terms of sort of paying a lot of money to Turkey and Azerbaijan paying a lot of money to PR firms to put their stuff online, but also having legions of not only bots but also real people posting the Azeri side anytime Armenia or something that was more neutral or sort of represented Armenia side, they would attack it with hundreds or thousands of people. So it was a very well coordinated online effort, and I think we have a lot to learn in all three of those areas. Armenia is actively working in all three areas, but I think in terms of the audience that's listening to today, I mean, there's a lot that can be done that we can all prepare for on the information warfare and information security side as we move forward.
And just to follow up, do you feel, Raffi, that the technology in and of itself would be enough to make the military more competitive?
No. And I think one of the other things that we learned during this war was that it's not just Azerbaijan, obviously, they because of the amount of oil and gas revenue that they had a much larger military budget than we had. And so for years, the Armenian sort of position was, yes, they have a lot more money, they're buying all these sort of pretty toys, but they won't be able to use them in real time on the battlefield. But what we learned is that these technologies are not about sort of just pushing buttons or using joysticks from afar. It's actually reorganizing the army and reorganizing the way we go, the way we defend ourselves, or in certain cases, the way we attack, to be able to use these technologies much more effectively. It means deploying a lot of these technologies at a more sort of granular level and rethinking about the way our armed forces are organized and the way that they're trained. So it definitely is not just about technology.
You're talking about, okay. Dr. Yervant, you have made the distinction between producing and implementing software and the need to develop hardware. Can you please expand on this and perhaps explain how this
Sure. Yes. I mean, while Armenia, what I addressed earlier about the technology sector in Armenia, creating products, developing products, and so on, that's from a production point of view. In war or in any situation, this defense situation with Artsakh was more about utilizing modern technologies, utilizing modern warfare. Defense, similar to any other technology domain, changes over time. We change our mobile smartphone every so often, we change our cars every so often, we change our computers. Things do change and we need to be on top of it. So also in defense, we have to be in the state-of-the-art technology. Now, using state-of-the-art technology doesn't mean that we have to produce the entirety or partially. One has to look at what needs to be obtained from outside, what needs to be obtained internally. In Azerbaijan, for instance, we know that the UAVs that we discussed, technological advancements in UAVs and so on, were not manufactured in Azerbaijan. They're mostly obtained from other countries, from Turkey, from Israel, and so on. Now, when it comes to Armenia, we first need to differentiate between what we need to do in-house, what we need to bring from outside, even the equipments. Today, when you buy a car in the US here, a Toyota is partially made in the US, partially made in Japan. So it's a combination. So that combination is important. We call it in industry make versus buy. What pieces you make and what pieces you buy. So we need to bring a certain point. Of course, you don't want to be totally dependent. We want to economically to make it viable. There are multiple factors to make that decision, but make versus buy is an important component. Now, what we developed in Armenia in terms of technology sector so far in the past years were more in the IT domain, in the software domain, not much in the hardware domain. So Armenia today lacks the hardware culture, the manufacturing culture, the ability to have conveyor belt, the ability to build boards, to build systems, and so on. As Raffi mentioned, we have several attempts. We have several companies coming up. We're happy about that. But the majority of the investment so far was more in the software domain. UAVs, drones, or any other technological defense equipments would need both. Would need the hardware and the software components. So we have to, again, build ourselves, plan, and that will take some time. It will not be immediate. Bringing manufacturing culture to Armenia is not something that happens overnight. Many other countries did that. We can learn from them and we can plan accordingly. That's why I think the hardware versus software component we need to understand and decide what we bring from outside, buy, versus what we make in-house.
Okay. So if we were moving forward from the war, in the post-war recovery area that we are currently finding ourselves in, what are the current technological capabilities of Armenia? What are the various companies, universities, research centers? In which areas of the economy would tech companies be categorized? Telecommunications, health, transportation, education, manufacturing?
Yes. Today's technological sector has in it certain domains of excellence, we call them. Certain things that we're able to invest in, and we have a worldwide stature in them. Semiconductor sector is one of those, for instance. In AI, we're investing a lot and we're becoming quite dominant with some of the products that we're creating in that space. So there are certain sectors of industry that we are good at. If we want to be good at defense industry as well, we need to have the proper investment. Today, there are attempts by those smaller companies, which is great. We need to bring in perhaps some multinationals. Perhaps we need to build our educational system to give the right background of technology. And what's the background of technology here? Here, you don't need only the software side of it. You need, and the parts of the software that are necessary, image processing, AI, and so on. But also you need the mechanical engineering. You need industrial engineering. You need quality assurance. We need to bring in ISO certification. We need to make sure that we are properly ready to do this volume manufacturing for equipment, from boards to systems.
And are we, so looking into the country's strength, so looking at a country's strength is based on many factors, and not least of which is the economic resources. Several smaller countries, such as Estonia, Israel, et cetera, have turned technology into major economic force for them. could we learn from these countries? And what measures does our government have to take to support what you're speaking of, creating a greater technology industry?
So I think it's interesting. I mean, the examples you use, sorry, Yervant, let me just jump
No,
in.
no,
And,
no, please, it's
yeah.
conversation.
I mean, I think the two examples you use are very different examples. I mean, both small countries with sort of advanced technology industries. And with Israel, the technology industry has been so closely tied to sort of the evolution of the country, and in particular, the focus on being able to defend against sort of much larger, set of enemies in a very, dangerous part of the world, for lack of a better word. But what's really interesting, and I think what's relevant to this, is that if you look back to when the real symbiosis between Israel's sort of defense establishment and its technology sector really grew after the 1973 war. I mean, in the 48-49 war, they were able to sort of defeat the initial attack by the Arabs. In 67, they took the initiative and were able to get a lot of land. In 73, for many Israelis, it was considered, if not a loss, at least something, certainly not at the same level of success that they had in 67. And that really got them to rethink about, okay, how do we prevent the Yom Kippur War from happening again? And that's where you saw this not only investment in local military technology, but the creation of special technology-enabled units within the army, and then having a sort of a very selective process of people to go into those units, and then also making sure that the time in the army was not just used to do sort of standard military service, but a lot of the both men and women that serve in the army were learning different skills, and were actually learning to work together as teams that they use as they come out of the army to establish startups, to be able to, and they weren't, not everything Israel produces is military technology, right? And a lot of the biggest successes they've had, frankly, have been the commercial successes have been outside of military technology. But it's because of sort of the requirements they had around anything from sort of threat detection to image processing to different kinds of being able to go through large amounts of data, have all resulted in technology that's now adopted, that's now used by all of us, from smartphones to other kinds of applications. So I think that's from Israel. So it was very much driven from the defense side. With Estonia, I think they just said, look, we have to figure out how to come out from under the sort of this post-Soviet, kind of umbrella. And they made e-government a central part of their technology strategy, to make sure that everything in Estonia is done electronically, and that drove a lot of innovation that went beyond e-government. So very different strategies to try to get to the same outcome.
So, okay. So different strategies, small countries. Now we're looking at Armenia. What do you propose for the country to undertake to give the necessary support to industry in other than funding? So should we have special counsels, a tech ambassador? What would you propose?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. The first is that besides the financial assistance, we need to prepare the talents. We need to prepare the necessary
human capital
capacity. Yes, the human talents. So that capacity building comes with education, with research involvement. And there is not only Armenia, we can come back later on, but diaspora has a role to play as well. Okay, so it's a global concern to build in the capacity, to bring the education, the research component, and even when it comes to manufacturing, just funding the startups is not enough. We need to create a common, a shared manufacturing process for them all, which doesn't exist, to give them shared capacities, shared PCB building, shared system building, shared quality insurance. So there are certain things that the government, not only the government, foundations can come in and play a role. And there are certain efforts going on. We'll be announcing those soon to create this shared capability for startups to come and benefit from. But they will not be able to invest the entirety. So some of which has to be offered by this joint effort, by this joint responsibility as such.
The other thing I would add is that there's been a lot of focus on sort of the university education as the sort of the focal point to try to drive technology, to supply, frankly, for lack of a better word, the technology industry, right, and to drive the growth. And when we talk about the growth, you mentioned some of the numbers and the growth of the industry, a lot of that is limited by the amount of talent that we have. And we see that there's two ways to, or three ways actually, to complement what's happening. So the first is I think we need to get past this model that everyone has to have a 4-year university degree to be able to be productive in different, I mean, especially if we're talking about production or manufacturing, right? I mean, there's a, Germany has a very well-established sort of vocational school program that where after high school, you don't go to a full 4-year university, but you have 1 or 2 years of specialized training that, guides you towards the automotive industry or other parts of sort of, the manufacturing in Germany. And so we're actually with UAT, we're playing around with that, not playing around, actually, we have serious programs in that area. So for the last 7 or 8 years, we have worked with the government to deploy robotics and programming laboratories in public schools. So right now we have about 575 schools around the country that have a lab where kids go 2 to 3 times after school, are guided by teacher who we've trained into the basics of using 3D printers, CNC machines, putting robots together and doing programming for that. So and we hope to expand.
Just to clarify, do you mean elementary, secondary kids, or older?
It's actually, the program goes from 10-year-old through high school. So it starts in 5th or 6th grade, I think, all the way through the end of high school. And obviously the program sort of has different components to it for those different years. And the other thing, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so just to be clear, you're advocating having more vocational training programs.
Well, that part is not vocational, because that part actually, those kids could go on. Many of them, actually, most of them go on to university or go to for the boys or men they're serving in the army and then going to university. But along with that, we've adopted this concept that's called the real school. And the real school essentially takes, in Armenia, high school is 10, 11, and 12th grade. So it's only 3 years, not 4. So it's basically, by entering the real school, you enter in 10th grade and you have 1 year of sort of traditional class training, and then 11th, 12th, and then 1 year sort of post high school. All of your time is spent working with companies or startups, working on specific projects. So it's very project driven, and the kids can decide they want to go sort of drone kind of design and manufacturing, or whether they want to go into, electronics and PCB boards or whatever that might be. And so by the end of those 4 years, which is only 1 year beyond high school, they've spent a lot of time on, team-based work, project-based work in an area where they could easily become at least an apprentice, for example, as Yervant was mentioning, in a shared manufacturing facility, or they could go on to work, or when they go to the army, they could actually be either the drone pilot or the person that's servicing drones, right? Because a lot of these drones you have, especially if they're being used in very rough conditions, need to be serviced. It's not just, whether you're buying or building, you still need to be able to take care of them afterwards. So one aspect is creating this sort of alternative to university and getting people to be very sort of practical and enter the workforce at that level. Frankly, that's already happening at the university level. I mean, Yervant knows this very well, where a lot of tech companies today will take in interns from their sophomore or junior year, and fully expecting them to become sort of full-time employees after they graduate from school. The other area that we're also focused on is really the scientific research area, which was very strong during Soviet times. And then because of the brain drain that happened in the 90s, sort of really fell behind. And that's an area that we think private sector really needs to work with government to recreate that capability.
Raffi, can you just clarify and speak to the brain drain for a minute? There's a question in the chat about that as well. What is it, and what is the result of it?
So, I mean, and Yervant can speak to this as well as I can. I'll just be very brief. In the 90s, and this was not just limited to Armenia, but there was a huge outflow of top scientists from all over the Soviet Union. Many went to Israel, for example. Many went to the West, including from Armenia. So all of that sort of very strong foundation that we had as a result of the amount of, the significant amount of R&D that was taking place during Soviet times, sort of a lot of those capabilities left along with the people that were the stars in each of these institutes. The second wave of brain drain has been sort of more, I would say, steadier, but at a lower level, which is over the last 20 years, the best and brightest of engineers, senior software developers are find better opportunities abroad. and over the last 5 years, frankly, have been cherry picked. So I mean, I ran 3 companies here, and I would literally spend a significant amount of my time trying to convince my best people not to go to Germany or not to go to the US because they are being targeted specifically via LinkedIn by these Western companies. And interestingly enough, one of the big benefits of the Velvet Revolution was that if you looked at the number of these sort of top tier engineers that were being recruited and emigrating, that number significantly dropped after the 2018 revolution because people saw, better opportunity, better, better chance for themselves and their families, and they stayed. Now we're in a big question mark as to what's going to happen after the war. Frankly.
Raffi, there's a question posed in the chat that I think you would be the best poised to answer. Why would an educated person go back to Armenia considering the brain drain? You just talked about it.
So I think a couple of things. One is that, some people come back for purely sort of, patriotic reasons. Some people come back for purely personal reasons. They want, one of the big drivers that my wife and I looked at when we came back from Silicon Valley here in 2008 was we wanted our children to grow up in an Armenian environment and have a very strong understanding, appreciation for who they are as Armenians. But to be perfectly frank, I think that from a career perspective, somebody that's either studied here and gone abroad to work or studied abroad and spent some time there can advance much more quickly here than they would being one of, several 100,000 people in Silicon Valley, for example, or being at, Sophia Antipolis in southern France or wherever. I think there is a real opportunity to have more impact at an earlier age and also take on a lot more responsibility that can help them whether they want to continue to stay in Armenia after that or emigrate once again.
Yeah, it's a big fish, in the pond.
Yeah.
Yervant, I
Yes.
want to get your 2 cents. I mean, as the president of the AGBU Armenian Virtual College, can you speak to this notion of technology and education briefly and briefly discuss ABC, its range of programs, the age of the participants, from which countries, and its impact?
Sure, I'll be happy to. As you know, technology is central to everything we do these days, right? It's the enabler, and in education also it is an enabler. So with ABC, with the AGBU Armenian Virtual College, we taught long time ago, back in 2006, that education need to be enhanced via technology, and especially with a nation distributed like ours globally. We need to provide our Armenian education as such through the global Armenian communities. And we did. So started 2009, we distributed a number of activities, courses, programs, special conferences, and so on, and ebooks via technology. But this technology moves all the time. So we noticed that doing this technology, like the defense technology, like the semiconductor technology, we need to be upgrading and updating continuously. So we have developed a nice R&D group and dissemination. So ABC today is a product and a service at the same time. So you have the products, but you need to do the servicing with it as well. Though initially meant for diaspora globally to teach Armenian language, history, culture. Today we also serve Armenia. Especially with COVID and the limitations of COVID for schools, we were able to create many new programs to reach Armenian schools in Armenia and diaspora to give content. Now we are doing more than that also. We're creating, as a result of that, virtual communities in different domains. Virtual communities that will help us. For instance, we did one for Armenian teachers. We did the conference. Then we continued with them as a virtual community. We did chess competition worldwide for high schools. 520 kids participated from 30 some countries. Now we have a community and they interact, they do various activities together and so on. So those communities are very good. In fact, one that you'll be very interested in will be in this resilience domain. AGBU was investing in webinars and you're bringing huge value, Annie, to those webinars in mental health and resilience. We're planning to have a resilience summit coming up soon in mid-February, will be announced soon, that will also create a community as such that can continue. precise.
So that's how do you keep, after the original novelty wears off, how do you keep participants and viewers involved?
That's interactivity. So it has to be interactive. It has to be immersive. If it's lecturing only, it is one way. Like this session, you're getting questions, answers, but that should be continuous. So after you do the live sessions, you can continue to do that interactivity, and the content can be provided further. So you need to give them more content, more sessions. That becomes more immersive.
So interactive pedagogical styles help create more sustained
and technology, exactly. And technology helps a lot in that.
Yeah.
Not only Zoom sessions when we talk to each other live. Technology is more in the interactivity that one can create afterwards. And there are lots of pedagogical studies on those. We take the best practices and we utilize those. So AVC has developed that kind of skill sets with its product and the service on how to make it immersive, how to make learning interactive. And with that, you can do the interactivity as well as the self-learning at the same time. We believe in the process. Yeah,
sorry, Yervant. So as I was mentioning earlier, I have come to learn that 50 to 60% of the applicants for IT departments are women. Today, half, and I know you're a trustee at the AUA, so half of all AUA computer science and engineering students are female.
Yes.
Tech centers like Pixart and Tumo similarly really pride themselves on having over 51% of their employees be women.
Yes.
Can you speak to, either one of you, what is the tech industry doing in Armenia to attract and retain women?
I think it starts from the Soviet days even, where doing engineering, doing technology was equally available for women and men. In the West, here, we don't do that. If you go to an engineering school, it's a different ratio. In Armenia, it's totally open. And women are not only the first level, second level engineers. They grow through the management. In our company at Synopsys, we have many managers, senior managers, direct. So we see their responsibility, their ability to run teams. As they're running their families, they can run very nice teams in companies as well. So they grow. So they start with technical contribution, and they move to the ranks of the companies. So at Synopsys, for instance, here in Silicon Valley, we have about 10% female population.
Oh, I'm looking forward to that. The reason I was asked to moderate this is because I figured you can, I know nothing about technology. If you can explain this to me, you can explain it to anyone. So I'm living proof of that.
So in Armenia, we have 40% of our population are female. But the problem that Raffi brought, and you also alluded to, the issue is the flow of talents. It's not only the ratio. The ratio is fine, but we don't have enough talents that are coming through the system to populate our companies. And as we want to increase, and there is lots of demand to increase more companies, existing companies to grow, unfortunately, the pipeline of feeding people from universities to the technology community is not strong enough. And that pipeline, we studied it. Only 6 to 7% of the high school graduates go to technology fields. Okay, the rest study history, they study business, they study other things. And we have so many open positions. I mean, if we have open positions in those fields, that's perfect, right? But not. In many cases, they have difficulty finding jobs, whereas we have today at least 2,000 open positions in the technology sector that need to be filled, and we don't have sufficient talents. That's exactly why working with the universities is important.
So if you had a magic wand, you or Raffi, both of you, I'm going to ask you, if you had a magic wand, what would you like to see happen?
In my case, I think strengthening the technological, scientific education, STEM in schools.
From elementary, from K through 12 to
Raffi? That is also in the regions, not only in Yerevan. We have very good people in Yerevan, but getting it from the regions also is important to feed that pipeline.
Yeah, and I think, look, I think things have changed. I mean, in addition to the RMAT labs that I spoke about, I mean, when parents really see that kids are coming out of, certainly, a couple of years out of school in university without, even before graduating, that they're earning, 3, 4, 500,000 drums, you know, which is much more than a lot of the parents earn. I mean, that's just a real you know, basic driver and motivator. And not to say that sort of all education should be just to see how much, you know, salary you can earn, but it also, you know, it makes a big difference. And I think, you know, in the past, the diploma was the important thing, and to many extent it still is. But as Yervant mentioned, if you have so many people going sort of to humanities fields where there's less opportunity in the marketplace, I think parents sort of can do the, you know, the hard math of saying, well, you know, maybe it's not just the diploma, it's what they're learning and what they're working on. And you know, Ani, you asked earlier about sort of what are some of the outcomes of the war. I mean, I think you know, now if you think about it, everybody knows about drones, right? And it's not that we should all only be thinking about military drones as the only thing we should be focused on, right? But when people understand that it's not, it's a combination of sort of having, you know, love and pride of your country, understanding your culture and language, but also having the technological capability to push your country forward from an economic development perspective, certainly from a military defense perspective. All those things kind of come together, and it's becoming a little bit more apparent. And that's why we focus so much, as Yervant said, specifically outside of Yerevan, in other regions, to say that there's an opportunity for somebody that's coming from a small village in Lori or Shirag or wherever that is, to enter into the STEM track and have an opportunity. And the opportunity doesn't just mean moving to Yerevan to work for a well-established company, right? It's about also having the opportunities in the regions that they're in.
In fact, can you speak a little bit to that? What role do you feel, in particular, the diaspora can play in the technological advancement of Armenia, including defense? And in what ways can the Armenian government benefit from this?
Oof, it's a broad question. Let me focus on sort of maybe 3 areas, and again, I'd love for Yervant to jump in as well. I mean, one of the things is what happened during the war, which is, as you know, there was sort of a huge effort to fundraise in the diaspora towards the war effort. Now, what's happened since the war is that we've moved from a sort of a pure donation kind of model to other financing models to be able to drive. And again, this is not just about military technology or improving defense. I mean, generally speaking, investing in, you know, having more venture funds, angel investing, other types of vehicles, you know, eventually, again, doing government bonds, to be able to invest in a more structured and professional way in the different areas that we need to be able to develop the country in terms of infrastructure development, economic development, security development, whatever that might be. The second one is, and we saw this, and unfortunately, I think even though the war seemed very long, over 44 days, it was very short in terms of our ability to respond in very specific ways. So from day one, we all had, Yervant, myself, hundreds of us had all of these, you know, people were reaching out to us from all over the world saying, you know, I'm a artificial intelligence engineer, or I'm a hardware engineer, or I know optics, you know, how can I help? How can I help, right? And when you're in the middle of the war effort and you're trying to literally decide sort of how to direct even local resources before thinking about it, you know, sort of resources that are spread around the world, I think we need to do a much better job of connecting people that have real, in the diaspora, that have real experience in these areas that are super important for the development of Armenia, and being able to do that, whether they come in and do something like a 2-week kind of, you know, series of master classes, or take a sabbatical from the company that they're working with and spend 6 months in one of these training centers, or working or teaching at the university, or working with a research lab. I think there's, you know, I think I saw Naida Hovagimian on the list today, and she spent a lot of time working with people here locally to try to develop that. So I think that the second area is sort of, you know, talent, right? And being able to give it not just in terms of financial support. The third one is a little bit, I think, broader. I think we all need to understand that the success of Armenia is very much dependent on the amount of investment, and I don't mean financial investment, that each Armenian makes, even whether it's from Armenia proper, from people that come and go, or from people that have never been here before, saying, you know, this is part of who I am, and I'm not going to wait for somebody to tell me what to do to help. I mean, we've seen a lot of people come and say, you know, I'm a specialist in this area, let me see what I can do here, or who can I work with to get something started. I think it's, you know, it really comes down to each of us saying, this is not just about me. This is not just about a personal career choice that I'm making or a family choice that I'm making. It's really about sort of the duty that I have as an Armenian to help Armenia progress and Armenians progress as we look ahead.
Okay.
After all, we are landlocked, and this is one of the main resources we can export. And thinking about what you were saying, Raffi. I'm sorry, Yervant, did you want to add to that?
If we are on the same question, yes, I can add to that.
Yes, please go for it.
The fact that the diaspora impact in this domain, I think, was far more than other domains, because technology, again, as you said, it doesn't have any boundaries. It can be where. So the technical contribution of diaspora to Armenia, even I would say, not only funding, but rather creating companies and so on, as I was saying earlier, was fundamental. So diaspora's role in Armenia's technology sector over time was very good. And now we are seeing more of it in the recent past as well, during war and during this situation. Here, for instance, for many years, the AGBU Silicon Valley has been helping many companies that are coming from Armenia to diaspora to do the acceleration, to do the growth in Silicon Valley. That is continuing. We have established a very nice program before the war, even since last year, called the Armenian Virtual Bridge. That's a collaboration between the high-tech industry in Armenia, the high-tech industry ministry in Armenia, and the HBU Silicon Valley, where we take companies, we do incubation in Silicon Valley, and we do acceleration. So we did the acceleration program for 15 companies, very nice, one of which you mentioned, the Robin Robot company. So 15 nice companies that are very successful, but they need to grow internationally. And that acceleration program went online because of COVID. We did it online. We're still continuing on that. In fact, in 2 weeks, we have the pitch session for them to meet investors and so on. But everything is being done currently in an online manner. Now, these are all attempts to help the tech industry, either from the beginning, from education to research to startups that are coming up. So at every level, we can bring in that linkage. And I fully agree with Raffi that every Armenian, in every field, in fact, but especially in the technology field, they are able to contribute. There are the vehicles, there are the necessary bridges available for them to contribute. In the war period, we saw many more people coming up. We didn't know that Silicon Valley had so many Armenians. So many people who were not connected to Armenia jumped in.
I love that. And in creating, and what Raffi was alluding to, and you, Yervant, as well, how technology can be helpful to create nationhood, to invest in the nation. Not just for economic scarcity, but just to bring the diaspora and the citizens of the country closer together. These are ways, I don't know, but I'm assuming you've discussed and you've given examples of how we can go ahead and use technology to help further nationhood.
Absolutely, because as a global nation, technology is a major gift to the internet, the cloud, the abilities for us to communicate today. There are so many things that are a gift for a nation like us that is distributed over 200 countries around the world. We have to leverage it fully. AVC, the Armenian Virtual College, leverage that for education purposes. Others are now for this defense industry, we need to leverage it as well. We need to bring in all the scientists that we have, and there is a very good attempt going on now, bringing in the scientists, bringing the people who have industrial knowledge in the defense domain. We need to bring them together. So this global linkage that we can create is very important for us as one nation to help the homeland.
Yeah, yes, and also, how can we use tech and broadband to become call centers, architectural subcontracting, accounting, maybe medical? You get the drift. We can do that.
We can. We need enough talent.
Let's talk about that. What are the short-term and long-term measures to be taken to meet such needs? 30,000 tech specialists are needed, it is estimated, by 2025 in Armenia. How are we going to achieve this?
So starting from schools, from STEM in schools, and we do have various programs, like Raffi mentioned, the robotics program. We in our company, we are contributing again to STEM program in 10th, 11th, 12th grade, in communication, semiconductors, and software. Okay, so they start learning in the school, and when they go to the school universities, they're already motivated.
So you start young. I'm all about when you change the beginning of the story, you change the whole story.
Absolutely.
So I have now, I'm going to share you with the audience. So I have a couple questions that are directed to, some that are directed specifically to each of you. Okay, let's start with, okay, this one. Dear Ani, I have one or two questions. This is from Robert Sahakian from the Honorable Mr. Zorian. How is going on the process of creation the High Connect, WCIT 19, and digital bridge to Silicon Valley? He is working at Yervant Vivacell MTS Mobile Teleco. This is Robert, leading engineer of IT data centers, infra operation.
Okay, very good. Thanks for the question, Robert. Two points then, High Connect and Army Virtual Bridge, both of which we announced them last year at WCIT in October. High Connect, for some of you who don't know, is this social communication networking. I wouldn't say social, communication networking for professionals of Armenian descent, people who are interested in Armenian and Armenians. So we created a small team. We have a board of 4 people, Sej Tankian, Eric Israelian, and Alexis Ohanian, and myself. So we are running this nice foundation that is sponsoring the creation of a nice tool that will allow us professionals in the engineering field, in the medical field, in the UAVs and so on, so to be able to communicate from the global presence of Armenians and be able to do something good. So goodness is an important measure. So there's even motivation to do goodness for individuals, for projects, for communities. It's an excellent program. The tool is almost ready. Some of you who would like to test it, let me know. We are at this point in the early stage of testing the prototype. And in spring timeframe, we are ready. We just had the board meeting last week. We are ready to do the launching of it, and we'll be able to absorb as many people as necessary to do all this communication. So we can do projects, we can do events, we can do communications and discussions via the High Connect infrastructure.
And I think I want to honor Robert's question. He's following up. It's a very technical question, so maybe directly he can write to HW, but let's just state it. Coming from the friends that came back from the war alive, they did not have any possibility to recharge their targeting HW radio, etc. Is it possible to develop thermal DC power mobile small generator like 14V 4.8 amps based on TGM modules for soldiers without IR radio to be covered from UAV targeting? I believe such a HV able to enable a lot of our soldiers as far as nowadays in military terms.
So let me answer the Robert's question a little bit more broadly.
Okay.
I think, and I had a couple of questions actually that were directed to me that I like to sort of answer at the same time, which they're all around sort of,
perfect.
They're all around kind of how ready is the military to understand sort of these new concepts, or the sort of the 5th generation, whatever you want to call it, warfare, and are they ready to sort of, you know, adapt to use these technologies? And I'd say that, you know, whereas the 2016 war was very short and there was very limited use of these newer technologies by Azerbaijan, it didn't sort of really sink in, even though a lot of, you know, people in the military at different levels really understood what this meant. But, you know, people say generals always fight the previous war, right? And I think that was definitely the case in terms of the sort of the longstanding doctrine on the Armenian side over the last few years. I think this war has fundamentally changed that. So whether it's Robert's very specific question around kind of how to recharge some of these, some of the sort of field level technology, or I had a couple of questions about how many, you know, how were drones actually used from the Armenian side during this war? And I don't want to get into any level of detail, but the answer is yes, they were used. And at all levels of the military, including at the very top of the general staff, there is an appreciation that we just need to be prepared for a very different, I mean, what happened over these 44 days really impressed upon everybody that we need to fight in a very, or be able to defend ourselves in a very different way. So I expect that moving forward, with sort of the technology industry really pushing things forward, I think you'll see that the government, whether that's the defense ministry, the general staff, or the armed forces, and the government in general, will understand that we really need to invest in these new capabilities. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not just technology, but it's also the way we organize the military, and we organize things like active reserve, the whole mobilization in case something happened, God forbid there's another conflict. So all these different elements, I think there were so many lessons learned, and there's nothing like, unfortunately, but maybe in this case it's positive, there's nothing like a defeat to really say, look, we really need to do things differently than the way we've done before, and I expect that to happen.
Okay, fair enough. Sevan Araz asks, can you please provide your thoughts on ways to boost private?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
In the defense innovation space? In particular, please touch upon the institutional mechanisms required to facilitate such cooperation.
Honey, I missed the first part of the question.
Sure. I'll repeat it happily. Sevan asks, can you please provide your thoughts on ways to boost private-public cooperation in the defense innovation space? In particular, please touch upon the institutional mechanisms required to facilitate such a cooperation.
Yes, I think it is necessary. It is necessary to have this private-public cooperation. Of course, the companies, once they're successful, they can work without the public domain. They can go out and expand internationally. But initially, to start with, like the Israeli model, the public funding and the public participation, the direction, the coordination is necessary for that sector to develop. But we need to look forward, though. We need to look forward, not prepare for the previous war, be prepared for the future. So planning is extremely important. Just thinking of where we lost and how we can recover that's looking backwards. Okay. So we need to look at tomorrow's situation, where we're moving ahead, and be prepared for that. And for that, we need to do proper scenario planning. I don't know how good we are at that in Armenia, but it's a very well-established domain. We do it for our companies. Countries do it also in a very structured, scientific way. So looking at the different scenarios, even the peace scenario or the war scenario or other. So we need to look at the different scenarios for the short term, what could happen in few years, what could happen in 10, in 20 years, and be prepared for them. Developing a totally new industry will not be done for a few years, right? It will take, so we have to have a solution for the short term, which could be more based on acquisitions, buying from outside. The longer term, maybe more doing it in-house. But we need to do proper planning and have different scenarios planned over time.
So for scenario planning. Victor Ahajanyan asks, from a social scientist's perspective, how may the current generalized institutional chaos in Armenia and massive popular disenchantment with the political leadership affect the technological initiatives and investments you're proposing? Can these initiatives, investments succeed without restoring and solidifying the institutional foundations of society?
So let me take a cut at that. As I talk to my colleagues in the technology industry, and this is, seeing how many of them literally sort of refocus from what each of their companies was doing to try to help in different ways during the war effort, and that's continued since then. So I think that it gets back to this notion of each of us has a responsibility to play our part in the development of our country. So that means that whether we have a government that's fully focused on exactly sort of the technological directions that we need to focus on, and is very much in step to answer the previous question on sort of this public-private partnership to achieve those objectives, or if you have a government that's focused on a lot of other things because, whether you want to use the word chaos or instability, whatever you want to use, I think the ball needs to be pushed forward. It needs to be pushed forward by each of us, and whether as individuals or as companies or as organizations, because, frankly, and this is not just in Armenia, governments come and go, political parties come and go, individuals come and go, but a lot of these things, like Yervant said, don't happen overnight. So if you want to invest in a capability, it's going to outlast whatever the it's gonna take longer than the next election, and we have to think that way.
Yes. Excellent. Yervant, would you like to add to that or no?
No, I fully agree with Raffi. Yeah,
I agree with you.
that's
Okay,
correct,
great.
yeah.
Okay. Now we have another question from Naira Hovakimian. If I could share from my experience, here is one successful example. A few years ago, Singapore announced a competition in between top US universities offering their medical robotics lab in their university and the easy regulatory environment in the country to go and spend their 1 to 2 years to advance their experimental research, otherwise impossible in US due to lack of appropriate regulatory environment. We tried to compete, but the winner was another top university. It was a win-win. US professors from this particular university got an opportunity of an unfair market advantage by getting access to modern cutting-edge facility, easy regulatory environment, free human resources as graduate students and junior researchers in Singapore. And Singaporean R&D community got an opportunity to quickly learn, engage, publish, and get recognized. Lots of IP got generated right there in Singapore. Their R&D lab got life, etc. So this can be a good example to follow. Create top-class, unique R&D labs in Armenia and invite US professors to spend time in Armenia long-term and give Armenian scholars to work side by side for long periods of time. The results will be quickly measured by scholarships and patents.
It's a great suggestion. Thanks, Naira. You always have suggestions. It's definitely a very practical one as well. That can be. The good news is that in Armenia, being a small country, being a flexible population and so on, implementing such things are not difficult. We work with 4 universities at the same time. We have different technology programs. We impact the curriculum. We graduate bachelor, master's, PhD programs, and they are very easily adaptable to Armenia. The university system, the Ministry of Education and so on, they're open for suggestions, for modifications and so on. So I don't think it will be difficult to implement something like this.
And Yervant, maybe you would be best poised to answer this with your 42 patents. Paul Murad asks, a measure of a country's technology's impact is the amount of patents that are produced, the area of these patents and the amount of technical papers produced. Do you have any numbers and comparisons with the previous year?
I don't have Armenia-wide. I know it from our company. We do high-end research. Therefore, we encourage patents. We have many patents that come from Armenia. We have lots of publications. We let our staff travel, do conference papers, of course, when travel is allowed, and do journal publications and so on. It needs to be part of the culture. So certain companies, certain universities are doing that, but I don't think it's systematically.
Okay.
Therefore, I don't see too many companies doing high-end R&D and protecting it with patents or publishing it publicly.
Okay.
I agree with that. I mean, I think it's these two ends, right? We talked about sort of one is the vocational training, which is sort of getting people into industry faster, and then this higher end of encouraging more, and this really happens. I mean, to Naira's point about government putting specific problems that need to be worked on, and then inviting experts.
Right.
And it could be, it could be non-Armenians, it could be Armenians. And we have this, huge resource, network of Armenian scientists and researchers around the world that could help as well.
In fact, Raffi, you'd probably be best. This is almost describing you. Zorian asks, what are your thoughts on trying to fill those positions with star talent outside of Armenia temporarily to continue to drive the innovation and advancement of those already in tech? It can drive the industry to grow faster and become more attractive to shift the pipeline's dynamic.
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm also on the board of Repat Armenia, and when we first launched the organization, we always talked about repatriation as being the ultimate goal, right? We've switched that around. We call it Engage with Armenia, and engagement has very many different shapes and forms, right? So it could be somebody coming and taking a sabbatical for 3 months to come and spend time here. It could be somebody saying, I'm going to take time out of my career. I'm going to sort of do something a little bit more risky and work with a startup in Armenia in a field that I'm particularly knowledgeable in. Or it could be, somebody who's a tenured professor in a top university around the world, so, looking for Armenian PhD candidates and having a program to be able to help them work in those labs and come back. So it can take very many different shapes and forms. And it's really, and you know, it shouldn't be dictated by the government. It shouldn't be dictated by Yervant or me or anyone else. I mean, I think there's people, take the initiative, right? Think about how you can make things happen.
Wonderful. I've got Naira went to follow up on my line of thought and thinking of the recent war. Example, we are not allowed to fly drones in university campuses in the US, and creating a few major drone labs here in flying fields where one could develop and test swarm technologies, have a few wind tunnels next to those, and taking advantage of the lack of FAA restrictions here that would hold our hands for rapid and easy flight testing. We can quickly advance our drone technology by inviting hosting of junior professors. Exactly. Naira?
It's a great.
Yeah, so great suggestions. Okay. And by the way, actually, Naira set this up, so you guys, whoever's on this call, is going to get a little bit of a get a little bit of a preview. Actually, this week, UAT will be announcing that we're adding a UAV or a drone module to our labs around the country. Now, there won't be one in every school just because it's a little bit more sophisticated, but over the next 2 years, we plan to have 50 such labs all over the country. And the 3 modules are sort of, drone design, which includes both fixed wing as well as copters, flying drones, and then servicing drones as well. And again, this is not just for military use. It could be used in all kinds of things in terms of agricultural yield improvement, and in terms of getting medical, supplies to remote areas. So you guys heard it first.
Impressive. Congratulations, Raffi, Naira, and
thank you.
UAT. Okay, Levon Kassarjian. Sorry if I didn't pronounce your name. Kassarjian asked, I am a recently retired consulting engineer, project manager from the oil and gas manufacturing industry. After visiting Armenia 3 times in the last 15 years, I am interested in offering my services either as angel investing and providing coaching for startups. What is the best way to connect with legitimate organizations or contacts? Wonderful.
Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, these are different things. Funding, investing is one thing, of course. Technical contribution is something else. But we can definitely we can communicate with us. We can, depending on what we'd like to do in which field and so on, definitely there would be a match and there'll be a benefit from it.
So should he contact maybe ARPA for your information, and we can provide a contact source for both of you?
Absolutely. Yes,
that would be great. And then Armenian Volunteer Corps would be another. There's a program called Armenian Volunteer Corps, which is actually aimed at people that are quite advanced in their field that want to come and spend some amount of time on the ground here in Armenia working with local companies or local organizations.
Yeah.
Dr. Panelists, did you want to add?
Yeah, they can connect with ARPA, and we can also connect them with the right people. Yes.
Very good.
Okay.
Yeah. If High Connect was already available, that would have been the easiest way to.
Yes.
To
we need such a place. Yes.
Exactly. More reason to do that. Okay. So the next question is from. Sorry, okay. So how can we incentivize talented scientists outside of Armenia to come in and assist in advancing? We talked a little bit about that, I feel. Is there anything you want to add to that or no?
No, I think we pretty much covered it. I mean, I think it really is tied to more focus on research institutes, reinstating PhD programs in some of the universities, and really focusing on that. Because actually, one of the challenges we have is that because there's so much demand for tech talent in the industry as it is, a lot of people are, sort of as soon as they get their bachelor's, they're employed by industry very quickly, and so the number of people going to masters and then going to PhDs is smaller than it could be. So we need to change that ratio.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And we have 1 or 2 final questions. Are there any initiatives to develop satellite technologies and launch capabilities in Armenia?
I'm not aware of. Raffi, do you know of any?
I'm not aware of that either.
Yeah.
All right.
Again, back to what I was saying earlier, we don't need to develop everything ourselves. We can acquire, we can utilize, we can rent. So we have to look wider. Not everything we need to use has to be developed in Armenia.
And are we marketing our talents to the US and Western companies? Yeah.
We are. We have various
Yes.
consulting firms that do that do subcontracting work and so on. Yes, but since we don't have enough talents in Armenia for our own companies, we don't do that very proactively these days.
Yeah, the problem is they're finding us and taking and poaching them.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting problem to have. Well, we've run out of time, so we are going to have to leave the conversation there. I want to thank Dr. Yervant Zorian and Mr. Raffi Kassarjian for addressing these difficult questions, and to all of you for watching. Thank you.
If I may, Ani, just to announce that our next presentation will be by Professor Simon Payaslian on Daniel Varujan and at the University of Ghent. So this is going to be a totally different subject, and I will, of course, we will send you all the information in the near future, and would like to invite everybody to participate.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you from all of us.
Ani and Raffi and Yervant. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you for hosting us. It was wonderful. Thanks a lot.